Hope you can make it, even if you're still alone. Those words were a slap in the face. Mia stood crumbling in the dirty office stairwell, sobbing over the wedding invite from the man who broke her heart. She was hyperventilating, a mess of running mascara, 10 minutes before a board meeting. Suddenly, the door slammed open. She froze. It wasn't a friend. It was him, Damian Blackwood, her cold, ruthless billionaire boss who fired people for breathing wrong. Mia squeezed her eyes shut, terrified. She waited to be fired, but the shouting never came. Instead, a hand reached down, not to crush her, but to pull her up. Damian read the cruel note, his eyes darkening with a terrifying, protective fury. He checked his watch, cancelled his entire afternoon, and grabbed her arm with a grip that made her knees weak. Then, he whispered the unthinkable. "We aren't just going to this wedding, Mia. We are going as newlyweds." He didn't take her to a rental shop. He drove her straight to Graff Diamonds and bought a ring worth more than her life savings. But why? Why would the city's most powerful man fake a marriage for his secretary? Is he playing a game, or has he been waiting for this chance all along? But what happened next? When they stepped out of that Rolls Royce, the silence was deafening. Now, before I tell you exactly how he destroyed her ex without raising his voice, hit that like button right now. And if you believe that true love protects you when you're weak, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story. Let's go to the moment the CEO became the husband. It started on a morning that felt colder than usual. The air in the corporate headquarters was always calibrated to a crisp, unyielding 68 degrees. It was a temperature designed to keep minds sharp, bodies alert, and productivity at its absolute peak, but to Mia, it just felt cold. She sat at her desk, the polished mahogany surface reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above, serving as a perfect mirror of the sterile, unforgiving world she inhabited. As the executive assistant to the city's most feared CEO, silence was her currency, and perfection was her baseline. She was invisible, a ghost in a tailored pencil skirt, ensuring the massive machinery of the corporation ran without a single squeak. She managed calendars, diffused tantrums from board members, and routed millions of dollars with a few keystrokes, yet she felt like she barely existed. Beneath the calm exterior, beneath the frantic typing and the polite telephone voice, Mia was fraying at the edges. The morning had been typical, relentless and loud, until the mail cart arrived. It deposited the usual stack of invoices, legal briefs, and trade magazines, but sitting on top of the mundane pile was something that didn't belong. It was a heavy, cream-colored envelope. The calligraphy was almost aggressive in its elegance, the loops of her name swirling like barbed wire. She knew who it was from before she even flipped it over. Jason, the man who had promised her forever only to leave her for someone less complicated 6 months ago. Her fingers trembled, a subtle vibration that rattled the heavy paper, as she slid a silver letter opener under the wax seal. Inside, the invitation was thick, expensive cardstock, smelling faintly of the cologne he used to wear, a sensory trigger that sent a wave of nausea rolling through her stomach. It wasn't just the wedding date. It wasn't just the names, Jason and Chloe, printed in embossed gold foil that caught the light. It was the handwritten note scrawled at the bottom in blue ink. "Hope you can make it, even if you're still alone. It would mean a lot to show there are no hard feelings." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't an invitation, it was a victory lap. He wanted her there to witness his happiness, to stand in the back as a testament to what he had discarded. He wanted to parade his new life in front of her while highlighting her solitude. "Even if you're still alone." The words blurred as her vision swam, the blue ink turning into a smudged bruise on the page. The office sounds, the low hum of the server room, the chatter of sales reps down the hall, and the relentless ringing of line 2, became a deafening roar. Mia placed the card face down, her hand shaking so violently she knocked over her stapler. A few heads turned. She froze. In this glass-walled aquarium of high finance, emotion was weakness, tears were a liability. She couldn't let them see her break. She couldn't let the corporate sharks smell blood. She stood up, her legs feeling like they were made of lead, and grabbed a file folder as a prop. "I need to check the archives." She whispered to no one in particular, her voice cracking under the strain of holding back a sob. She walked briskly past the conference room, keeping her head down, praying no one would stop her. As soon as she pushed through the heavy fire door into the emergency stairwell, the facade shattered. The heavy metal door clicked shut, sealing out the pristine world of the office and leaving her in the dim, concrete echo chamber of the stairs. The air here was stale and smelled of dust, but it was safe. Mia didn't just cry, she crumbled. She slid down the wall, clutching the invitation against her chest as if it were a physical wound. The tears came hot and fast, ruining the makeup she had applied with such care at 6 a.m. Why did it hurt so much? It wasn't that she wanted him back. He had been selfish and critical. It was the confirmation of her deepest fear, that she was easily replaced, that she was the before picture in someone else's success story. She felt small. She felt unlovable. She felt like a background character in her own life, destined to watch everyone else find their happy ending while she stayed late to file paperwork. The sobs racked her body, echoing off the concrete walls, amplifying her humiliation. She buried her face in her knees, trying to muffle the sound, trying to make herself disappear completely into the shadows. She was so lost in her grief, so consumed by the wave of self-pity and pain, that she didn't hear the door open above her. She didn't hear the heavy, rhythmic click of footsteps descending the stairs. She was hyperventilating, gasping for air between sobs, a mess of mascara and heartbreak on the cold floor. Then, a shadow fell over her. It blocked out the dim light of the exit sign. The presence was imposing, silent, and heavy. Mia froze. The air in the stairwell shifted, charged with a sudden, terrifying electricity. Slowly, terrified of which colleague had found her in this state, she lifted her head. Her vision was blurry, obscured by tears, but she could see the shoes first. Perfectly polished, Italian leather, black, not a scuff on them. They were shoes that cost more than her rent. Her gaze traveled up the sharp crease of the charcoal suit trousers, past the expensive watch, to the face of the man standing over her. It wasn't a colleague. It wasn't a friend. It was him, Damien Blackwood, the CEO, the man who never smiled, never tolerated mistakes, and terrified the entire board of directors. He was staring down at her, his expression unreadable, watching his perfect secretary fall apart on the dirty floor. Mia scrambled backward, her heels scraping against the concrete floor with a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the small space. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her system, instantly overriding the heartbreak she had been drowning in just seconds before. This was Damien Blackwood. He didn't have emotions. He didn't make excuses. He viewed crying in the workplace with the same disdain he viewed a drop in quarterly projections, as a failure of discipline. She frantically wiped at her cheeks, smearing the mascara further, her breath hitching in her chest as she tried to compose herself. She looked like a mess. She knew it. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes were red and puffy, and she was cowering on the floor of a stairwell like a frightened child. She was going to be fired. She was certain of it. She started to stammer, the words tumbling out in a broken, nonsensical stream. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm so sorry. I just needed a minute. I'm going back to my desk right now. It won't happen again. I was just checking the archives and slipped and..." The lie died in her throat. He wasn't looking at her face. His gaze was fixed on the crumpled piece of cream-colored cardstock she was trying desperately to hide behind her back. She clamped her hand tighter around the invitation, crushing the expensive paper, wishing she could dissolve into the concrete. Damien didn't speak. He simply extended a hand, palm open, expecting compliance. It was a command, silent and absolute. Mia hesitated, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. To refuse him was unthinkable, but to show him the source of her humiliation felt like stripping naked in the middle of the boardroom. "Mia," he said. His voice was low, a deep baritone that seemed to vibrate through the walls. It wasn't a question. Defeated, she slowly brought her hand forward and placed the mangled invitation into his palm. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the inevitable reprimand. She waited for him to tell her that personal drama had no place in his company, that she was unprofessional, and that she should pack her things. But the lecture never came. Instead, silence stretched out between them, heavy, suffocating, and terrifying. She opened one eye. Damien was reading the note. He wasn't skimming it. He was studying it with the same intensity he applied to a hostile takeover contract. His face, usually a mask of stoic indifference, shifted. It was a subtle change, one that only someone who had studied him for 3 years would notice. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering near his ear. His eyes narrowed, not with annoyance, but with something darker. A cold, quiet fury seemed to radiate from him, dropping the temperature in the stairwell by another 10 degrees. He wasn't angry at her. He was angry at the paper. Jason. Damien read aloud, the name sounding like an insult in his mouth. He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The one who calls the office line and hangs up when I answer? The one who told you that your promotion was cute? Mia blinked, stunned. She didn't know he listened to those calls. She didn't know he remembered those details. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling. He's getting married. This weekend. Damien smoothed the paper out with deliberate, terrifying precision. And he sent this to you. With this note. He looked at the handwritten scrawl again, his lip curling slightly. To ensure you knew your place. To make sure you felt small so he could feel big. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Damien Blackwood understood power dynamics better than anyone, and he recognized a power play when he saw one. He looked at Mia, really looked at her, seeing past the ruined makeup and the red eyes to the competent, brilliant woman he relied on every single day. He saw the damage the note had done, the way it had stripped her of her confidence, and something in his demeanor shifted. The boss vanished. The predator emerged, but for the first time, he wasn't hunting her. He was hunting for her. Stand up, Mia. She hesitated, her legs feeling weak. Damien didn't wait. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and reached down. He gripped her elbow, not roughly, but with a firm, steady strength that shocked her. He pulled her up from the floor in one fluid motion, physically elevating her until she was standing toe-to-toe with him. He didn't let go. His hand stayed on her arm, a warm, grounding weight that kept her from swaying. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable but intense. You think you're crying because you lost him, Damien said, his voice surprisingly soft now. But you're crying because he made you believe you aren't worth anything without him. That is a lie. And I do not tolerate lies in my vicinity. He released her arm only to check the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist. He pulled out his phone, tapping the screen with decisive strokes. Cancel the meeting with the investors from Tokyo. Reschedule the board review for Monday. Tell the driver to bring the car around to the side entrance. Now. Mia watched him, bewildered. Mr. Blackwood, what are you doing? You can't cancel the Tokyo meeting. I just did. He interrupted, sliding the phone back into his pocket. He turned his full attention back to her. The invitation was still in his hand. He folded it neatly and placed it into his own suit pocket, as if confiscating the weapon that had hurt her. You are not going back to your desk today, and you are certainly not sitting in your apartment this weekend, crying over a man who isn't fit to hold your purse. I'm not going, Mia said, shaking her head, fresh tears threatening to spill. I can't go to that wedding alone. I can't let him see me like this. I won't give him the satisfaction. Damien stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that made her breath hitch. He reached out and grabbed her arm again, his fingers circling her wrist, his thumb pressing against her pulse point. The contact was electric, possessive, and confusingly safe. You're right, Damien said, his eyes burning with a strange, fierce light. You aren't going alone, and you certainly aren't going as his ex-girlfriend. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that sent shivers racing down her spine. We are going, and we are going as newlyweds. Mia stared at him, her mouth falling open. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The cold, untouchable CEO was offering to stage a marriage for his secretary? It was insane. It was impossible. But looking into his dark, determined eyes, she realized with a jolt of terrifying thrill that he was absolutely serious. Why would he do this? Was it a game? Or was there something else hiding behind that icy exterior? Before she could ask, he was already leading her toward the door. The next hour was a blur of motion and luxury that felt less like reality, and more like a fever dream. Mia sat in the passenger seat of Damien's sleek black sedan. He was driving himself, having dismissed the chauffeur. After all, this was a ruse, a temporary lie to save face. But when the car slowed, they weren't in the theater district. They were parked in front of the heavy, guarded doors of Graff Diamonds. "Mr. Blackwood," Mia started, her voice small in the quiet luxury of the car's interior. "We don't need to do this. A simple band will work, or I have some jewelry at home." "Stop." Damien cut her off, turning off the engine. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "If we are going to do this, Mia, we do it correctly. Jason knows you. He knows your habits, your budget, and your life. If we walk in there with a cubic zirconia and a dress from a department store rack, he will spot the lie in 10 seconds. We aren't building a costume. We are building armor." Armor. The word hung in the air, heavy and significant. He wasn't just dressing her up. He was fortifying her. Inside the jeweler, the staff didn't ask questions. They simply scrambled. Damien was evidently a known entity here, a man whose presence commanded immediate, terrified respect. He bypassed the display cases filled with delicate, modest bands and went straight to the private viewing room. Trays of diamonds were brought out, stones that cost more than Mia would earn in a lifetime. She shrank back, overwhelmed by the sheer excess of it. It felt wrong to play pretend with things of such value. "Your hand," Damien commanded softly. Mia extended her left hand, her fingers trembling slightly. Damien took it on his own. His hands were warm, large, and calloused in a way she hadn't expected from a man who pushed paper for a living. He didn't look at the price tags. He looked at her skin tone, the length of her fingers, and the shape of her nail bed. He dismissed 3 rings immediately with a shake of his head. "Too flashy," he muttered. "Too desperate." He picked up a 4th, an emerald-cut diamond flanked by baguettes, set in platinum. It was massive, yes, but it possessed a cold, sharp elegance that was breathtaking. It was a serious ring, a ring that said, "I am cherished." He slid it onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. The weight of it was shocking, a heavy, tangible anchor on her hand. Mia stared at it, mesmerizingly beautiful and terrifyingly real. "Damien, this is... I can't wear this. It's too much." "It's exactly enough," he countered, his voice low. He didn't let go of her hand. He turned it over, inspecting the fit, his thumb brushing against her palm in a gesture that felt startlingly intimate. "Jason gave you promises he couldn't keep. I am giving you a guarantee that no one will question. Look at that ring, Mia. Does that look like the hand of a woman who was left behind?" For the first time in years, Mia looked at her own hand and didn't see the diligent worker bee or the discarded girlfriend. She saw power. She saw worth. The contrast was dizzying. Jason had once fought with her for 2 days over the price of a birthday dinner. Damien had just dropped a fortune on a prop without blinking, purely to protect her pride. The loyalty of this fake husband already felt deeper than the love of her real ex. From the jeweler, they moved to a boutique that didn't have a sign out front, only a gold number on a black door. Inside, there were no racks, only mannequins and hushed assistants. Damien took charge again. He didn't ask her size. He simply pointed to a gown in the back, a deep, midnight blue silk that looked like poured water. "Try it," he said. When Mia stepped out of the dressing room, the silence in the room was absolute. The dress clung to her curves in a way that was modest yet devastatingly alluring. The dark blue made her skin glow, and the slit in the skirt offered just a hint of danger. She looked in the mirror and gasped. The woman staring back wasn't a secretary. She was a queen. She was someone who belonged on the arm of a billionaire. Damien stood behind her, his eyes meeting hers in the reflection. He didn't smile. Damien Blackwood didn't smile, but his gaze softened. He stepped closer, adjusting the strap on her shoulder, his fingers lingering on her bare skin. The heat of his touch burned through her, sending a jolt of arousal mixed with fear straight to her core. This was getting blurry. The way he looked at her, it wasn't the look of a boss evaluating an employee. It was possessive. "I was hungry. You look." He paused, searching for the word, his voice dropping an octave. "You look like mine." Mia's breath hitched. The air in the boutique seemed to vanish. "Damien," she whispered, "why are you doing this?" He didn't answer the question. Instead, he reached for her left hand, lifting it so the diamond caught the light of the chandelier. He held her gaze in the mirror, his expression intense and unyielding. "There is one rule for tonight, Mia," he said, his voice a command that vibrated in her chest. "Tonight you do not look at the floor. You do not look at your shoes. You look at me, or you look down on them. Do you understand?" "I understand," she breathed. "Good." He leaned in closer, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, sending shivers cascading down her neck. "Because once we walk through those doors, there is no turning back. We are married, and I take my vows very seriously." The ambiguity of his words hung in the air. How far will he take this? Mia wondered, her heart pounding against the silk of her dress. Was this just a role to him, a performance of his own power? Or was he using this lie to show her a truth she had been too blind to see? As he took her hand and led her back to the car, the line between fiction and reality began to dissolve, and for the first time, Mia didn't want to stop it. She wanted to see where the fall would take her. But the ring was just the armor. What happened when they actually arrived at the vineyard would silence the entire crowd. And the way Damien introduces himself to her ex, it sends a shockwave through the wedding that no one expected. The wedding venue was a sprawling vineyard estate, the kind of place Jason had always claimed was pretentious when they were dating but had evidently deemed necessary for his new life with Chloe. As the gravel crunched beneath the tires, Mia's stomach tightened into a knot. Through the tinted glass, she could see the guests mingling on the lawn, a sea of pastels and forced laughter. She spotted familiar faces, old friends who had drifted away after the breakup, Jason's judgmental parents, and of course, Jason himself. He was standing near the entrance, a glass of champagne in hand, looking every bit the triumphant groom. Beside him, Chloe preened in white lace, looking beautiful and smug. They were holding court, likely making bets on whether Mia would show up or joking about the sad little invite they'd sent to rub salt in the wound. "Breathe." Damien's voice cut through her panic. He didn't look at her. He was adjusting his cuffs, the epitome of calm. "Remember, you are not the victim here. You are the prize that got away." The car he had summoned was not the sedan from earlier. It was a Maybach, sleek, two-toned, and intimidatingly expensive. It glided toward the entrance like a predator entering a clearing. As it pulled up to the valet stand, the chatter on the lawn faltered. Heads turned. This wasn't just a nice car. It was a statement. It was a vehicle that cost more than the venue itself. The valet, a young kid in an ill-fitting vest, looked terrified as he approached the driver's side. Damien stepped out first. The movement was sharp and commanding. He stood to his full height, buttoning his jacket with a single, fluid motion. The silence that descended on the wedding party was instantaneous. Damien Blackwood was a recognizable figure. His face had graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune, but seeing him here, in the flesh, was jarring. He radiated an aura of authority that made the other men in their rental tuxedos look like boys playing dress-up. He ignored the stares, walking around the back of the car with deliberate slowness. He opened Mia's door. She took a deep breath, channeled every ounce of strength the ring on her finger gave her, and placed her hand in his. As she stepped out, the midnight blue silk of her dress caught the late afternoon sun, shimmering like liquid sapphire. She stood tall, her posture perfected by years of corporate armor but softened by the elegance of the gown. She heard a collective intake of breath from the crowd. She wasn't the mousy, heartbroken secretary they expected. She was radiant. She was stunning. Damien didn't move away. He tucked her hand into the crook of his arm, pulling her close against his side. The contact was solid, a physical barrier between her and the judgment of the crowd. They walked toward the entrance together, a united front of wealth and beauty that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the air. Jason's smile faltered. He blinked, tilting his head as if trying to process a glitch in the matrix. He took a step forward, his expression shifting from smugness to confusion, and then to a flicker of annoyance. He hadn't expected this. He had expected a sad, lonely woman he could pity. Instead, he was looking at a woman who seemed to have ascended to a different stratosphere. "Mia?" Jason called out, his voice sounding thin in the open air. He walked over, Chloe trailing behind him with a tight, confused smile. I didn't think you'd actually come. We wouldn't have missed it," Damien answered smoothly, his voice projecting effortlessly. He didn't offer a hand to Jason. He just stood there, towering over him, radiating a chilling politeness. Jason looked from Mia to Damien, his eyes widening as recognition dawned. "Wait, you're her boss, Mr. Blackwood, right?" He laughed nervously, a jagged sound. "Wow. Mia, I didn't know you were bringing your boss as a +1. Working on the weekend?" The dig was clumsy, an attempt to reassert dominance by framing her as the subordinate. Mia felt a flash of anger, but before she could speak, Damien squeezed her hand against his arm. "Boss?" Damien repeated the word as if it were a foreign concept. He looked down at Mia, his eyes softening into a look of such profound, tender adoration that Mia almost forgot it was an act. He brought her hand, the one bearing the massive diamond, to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "I suppose I was, once. But that dynamic changed quite some time ago." He turned his gaze back to Jason, the warmth vanishing instantly, replaced by steel. "I'm not her boss, Jason. I'm her husband." The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the wind rustling the grapevines. Jason's jaw literally dropped. Chloe let out a small gasp. "Husband?" Jason choked out. "Since when?" Are you guys married?" "We eloped." Damien lied effortlessly, the falsehood rolling off his tongue like velvet. "Just last week. I'm afraid I'm a rather impatient man. Once I realized what I had, I couldn't wait another day to make her mine. I simply couldn't risk letting her get away again." The double meaning hit its target, again, implying that Jason had been a fool to let her go. Jason's face flushed a deep, angry red. The shock was wearing off, replaced by aggressive disbelief. He stepped into Damien's personal space, his fists clenching at his sides. "Bullshit," he hissed, low enough so the wider crowd wouldn't hear, but loud enough for them. "Mia, what is this? You expect me to believe you married a billionaire a week after getting my invite? You're lying. You hired him, didn't you? Or is this some kind of joke?" The air crackled with tension. The audience watched, holding their breath, sensing the confrontation. Would the lie crumble here? Would Jason call their bluff and scream it to the crowd? Damien didn't shout. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply shifted his stance, moving slightly in front of Mia, shielding her. He looked at Jason with a gaze so icy, so devoid of fear, that Jason actually flinched. Damien's hand moved from her arm to her waist, his fingers splaying wide, claiming her, holding her tight against his hip. "Be very careful with your next sentence, Jason," Damien said softly. The menace in his tone was palpable. "You invited my wife. We are here to celebrate your union. Do not make the mistake of insulting ours. I don't tolerate disrespect toward what is mine." He held Jason's gaze for a long, agonizing second, daring him to push, daring him to speak. Jason wavered. He looked at the car, the suit, the ring, and the terrifying confidence of the man standing before him. The doubt crept in. What if it's true? Jason swallowed hard, stepping back. "I am fine. Whatever. Welcome to the wedding." He turned and walked away, pulling a confused Chloe with him. Damien didn't relax. He kept his arm around Mia, guiding her forward. "Head up," he whispered against her hair. "You're doing beautifully, Mrs. Blackwood." But Mia's heart was hammering. They had survived the first wave, but the night was young, and Jason's eyes were still burning into her back. The lie had been cast, and now they were trapped inside it. The reception hall was a cavernous barn converted into a rustic chic dining space, filled with long farm tables, twinkling fairy lights, and the steadily rising volume of an open bar. The air smelled of roasted chicken and cheap perfume, while the rest of the room devolved into the chaotic, loud energy typical of weddings, drunken toasts, clinking glasses, and raucous laughter. Mia and Damien existed in a separate, serene orbit. They were seated at a table near the front, flanked by Jason's college friends and a few curious aunts who kept casting not-so-subtle glances at the diamond on Mia's finger. The performance required more than just proximity, it required intimacy. And Damien, the man who famously refused to shake hands during flu season, was playing the role of the doting husband with alarming naturalism. "Water?" he asked, leaning in close so only she could hear over the DJ's thumping bass. His hand brushed the small of her back as he reached for the carafe. "Please," Mia replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. He poured the water with deliberate care, then placed his hand over hers on the table. It wasn't a static touch. His thumbs swept back and forth across her knuckles in a slow, rhythmic caress. It was a gesture designed to be seen, a signal of ownership and affection to anyone watching. But to Mia, it felt confusingly real. His skin was warm, his grip grounding. Every time a guest approached with a prying question or a veiled insult, Damien was there, a verbal and physical shield. "So, Mia," one of Jason's old frat brothers slurred, leaning across the table with a sloppy grin. "Married, huh? That was fast. Didn't realize you moved on so efficiently. Jason said you were pretty broken up." Mia tensed, the old shame pricking at her neck. But before she could formulate a defense, Damien shifted. He didn't look at the man with aggression, he looked at him with pity. "Efficiency is a virtue in business, not in love," Damien said smoothly, his tone conversational yet laced with steel. He lifted his wine glass, taking a slow sip. "But when you find something rare, you don't waste time hesitating. I suppose some men just don't know the value of what they're holding until they lose it." He turned his head to look at Mia, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I wasn't about to make that mistake." The frat brother blinked, outmatched and outclassed, and mumbled an apology before retreating to his beer. Mia looked at Damien, her heart doing a strange somersault. He wasn't just defending her, he was rewriting the narrative. He was turning her rejection into a story of destiny. As the dinner progressed, the lines between the act and reality began to blur. He offered her a bite of his dessert, his eyes tracking the movement of the fork to her lips. He adjusted the strap of her dress when it slipped slightly. He listened to her when she spoke, really listened, ignoring the chaos around them to focus entirely on her words. She realized with a jolt that she had never seen this side of him. In the office, he was a machine, efficient, cold, and demanding. But here, in the protective bubble he had created, he was attentive. He was safe. For the first time in years, surrounded by people who had once made her feel small, Mia felt invincible. The DJs slowed the tempo, the lights dimmed, and the opening notes of a ballad filled the room. Couples began to drift toward the dance floor. "Dance with me," Damien said. It wasn't a question. He stood and held out his hand. Mia took it, letting him lead her to the center of the floor. He pulled her in close, closer than was strictly necessary for a fake couple. Her left hand rested on his shoulder, the heavy diamond catching the light, while his right hand settled firmly on her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. She could feel the heat radiating from him through the thin silk of her dress. She could smell the expensive, woody scent of his cologne mixed with the crisp starch of his shirt. They moved together in a slow sway, isolated from the spinning room. The noise of the wedding faded into the background. It was just them. The tension was palpable, a thick, electric current running between their bodies. "You're good at this," Mia whispered, tilting her head back to look at him. "Too good. You almost had me convinced back at the table." Damien looked down at her, his dark eyes unreadable in the dim light. "I don't do things halfway, Mia. You know that." "But why?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "Why go this far? You bought a ring. You canceled meetings. You're holding me like I actually matter to you. Why would you do all of this for your secretary?" Damien's hand on her waist tightened slightly. He didn't answer immediately. He spun her slowly, navigating them away from a stumbling couple. When he finally spoke, His voice was rougher, stripped of its usual polish. "Because you didn't deserve to cry," he said simply. "That's it." Mia searched his face. "Just pity?" "Not pity," he corrected sharply. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes, intense and burning. "Justice. I've watched you for 3 years, Mia. I've watched you handle crises that would break grown men. I've watched you smile when you were exhausted. I've watched you be kind when people were cruel." He leaned in closer, his forehead almost touching hers. "Seeing you on that floor today, broken by a man who isn't worth the dirt on your shoes, it made me angry. I wanted to remind you of who you are." His words hung in the air between them. "I've watched you." It wasn't the detached observation of a boss. It sounded like something else, something deeper. The way he looked at her now wasn't acting. A man didn't look at a woman like that unless there was history, unless there was a pre-existing affection that had been carefully, painfully suppressed. Mia's breath caught in her throat. "Damien, don't," he whispered, cutting her off. "Don't overthink it. Tonight, we are just two people who found each other. Let the rest of the world be jealous." He pulled her closer still, eliminating the last inch of space between them. Mia rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. It was beating fast, just as fast as hers. The realization sent a thrill of curiosity and fear through her. How much of this was a performance, and how much of it was a confession he could only make under the cover of a lie? As the song ended, she didn't want to let go, and terrifyingly, either did he. The intensity of the dance, combined with the wine and the sheer emotional weight of the evening, became too much. Mia needed air. She needed a moment to untangle the knot of confusion in her chest and separate the man from the myth, the boss from the husband. Murmuring an excuse to Damien, who released her with a reluctant nod, she slipped away from the noise of the reception hall. She found herself on a secluded stone terrace overlooking the dark vineyard. The air was cool and crisp, a welcome relief against her flushed skin. She leaned against the railing, taking deep breaths, trying to steady her hands. The diamond on her finger flashed in the moonlight, a heavy, beautiful reminder of the lie she was living. She traced the cold metal, wondering how she would ever be able to take it off, wondering how she would ever go back to being just Mia from the office after being Mrs. Blackwood for a night. "I knew I'd find you hiding." The voice made her jump. Mia spun around to see Jason standing in the doorway, his silhouette blocking the light from the hall. He wasn't smiling. His tie was loosened, his face flushed with drink, and his eyes held a glint of something ugly. Jealousy. "I'm not hiding, Jason," Mia said, lifting her chin, channeling the confidence Damien had lent her. "I'm enjoying the view." "Cut the crap, Mia." He stepped onto the terrace, the heavy door clicking shut behind him, sealing them in the semi-darkness. "You expect me to believe this charade? You and Blackwood? The guy is a shark. He eats people like us for breakfast. What did you do? Hire him? Sleep with him to get a promotion? You're drunk," Mia said coldly, moving to step around him. "I'm going back inside." Jason sidestepped, blocking her path. He laughed, a bitter, grating sound. "You think you're so special now because you showed up in a fancy car? You're still the same, Mia. Needy. Insecure. You think a guy like that actually loves you? He's playing you. Just like I did." The words were a slap to the face. The old Mia, the one who cried in stairwells, would have crumbled. But tonight she felt different. "He treats me with respect, Jason. Something you never knew how to do." "Respect?" Jason sneered. "He's using you as a prop." Suddenly, his hand shot out. He grabbed her upper arm, hard. His fingers dug into her soft flesh, not with the protective firmness Damien had used, but with possessive aggression. It was a mirror image of the earlier scene, but twisted into something violent. "Tell me the truth, Mia. Admit it's a lie. Let go of me." Mia gasped, trying to wrench her arm free, panic flaring in her chest. The old fear came rushing back, the feeling of being trapped, of being overpowered. "Not until you admit. I suggest you remove your hand from my wife." The voice didn't come from the door. It came from the shadows of the terrace corner, deep and dangerously calm. Jason froze. Mia's heart leaped into her throat. Damien stepped into the moonlight. He didn't look like a CEO now. He looked like an executioner. His hands were in his pockets, his posture relaxed, but the air around him crackled with lethal intent. He didn't shout. He didn't rush. He simply walked toward them with a slow, predatory grace that was infinitely more terrifying than any scream. Jason released Mia instantly, stumbling back as if burned. We were just talking. Talking implies a conversation, Damien said, his voice smooth as glass and just as sharp. He stopped between them, placing himself physically in front of Mia, cutting off Jason's line of sight. What I saw was assault. I didn't hurt her, Jason stammered, the alcohol bravery evaporating in the face of true power. Look, Blackwood, you don't know her. You don't know our history. I was just trying to get her to be honest. Damien tilted his head slightly. Oh, I know you, Jason. I know you very well. He took a step closer, forcing Jason to retreat until his back hit the stone railing. Jason Miller, owner of Miller Tech Solutions, or should I say former owner? I understand your liquidity issues have become severe. 3 loans defaulted in the last quarter? And I believe the bank is threatening foreclosure on your new marital home? Jason's face went white. How do you know that? I know everything, Damien replied coldly. I make it my business to know the threats against my family. And right now you are a threat. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that Mia could barely hear, but the menace was unmistakable. You thought you could humiliate her with that invitation. You thought she was weak, but you failed to realize one critical thing. She is under my protection now. Damien reached out, brushing a speck of dust from Jason's lapel, a gesture of ultimate dominance. She is not just my wife, Jason. She is the most important person in my life. She is the only reason I am standing here talking to you instead of destroying your pathetic little company with a single phone call. Mia stared at Damien's back, her breath caught in her lungs. The most important person in my life. The words echoed in her mind. He was lying. He had to be. This was part of the act. But the ferocity in his voice, the sheer weight of his anger, it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a warning shot from a man protecting his heart. Damien stepped back, his eyes still locked on Jason's terrified face. Touch her again, he said, enunciating every syllable, and I won't just ruin you. I will erase you. Do we have an understanding? Yes, Jason whispered, trembling. Yes, I understand. Good. Damien turned his back on him, dismissing him as if he were nothing more than a nuisance. He turned to Mia, his expression instantly transforming from eyes to concern. He gently took the arm Jason had grabbed, his thumb brushing over the skin as if checking for bruises. Are you all right? He asked softly. Mia nodded, unable to speak. She looked at him, searching for the lie, but all she saw was a fierce, burning intensity. He wasn't acting, at least, not entirely, and that terrified her more than Jason ever could. But the act was working too well. What happens in the car ride home changes the dynamic from fake to frighteningly real. And the secret Damien reveals the next morning? It threatens to destroy everything they just built. The exit from the wedding was nothing short of a victory march, though performed with quiet, devastating elegance. Damien led Mia through the reception hall one last time, his hand firmly at the small of her back, guiding her past the stunned faces of guests who now looked at her with envy rather than pity. Jason was nowhere to be seen, likely nursing his ego and a stiff drink in a dark corner. They didn't say goodbye. Royalty doesn't need to announce its departure. They simply vanished into the night, slipping into the back of the waiting Maybach as if stepping into another dimension. As the heavy door thudded shut, sealing them inside the plush, leather-scented cocoon of the car, the adrenaline that had fueled Mia for hours began to drain away. It was replaced by a heavy, languid exhaustion and a confusing swirl of emotions. The silence in the car was profound. Outside, the vineyard blurred into streaks of black and silver under the moonlight, but inside, the air was thick with things unsaid. Damien sat beside her, loosening his tie with a weary sigh. The mask of the invincible CEO slipped just a fraction. He looked tired but satisfied, He didn't pull away to his side of the seat. He stayed close, his thigh brushing against hers as the car navigated the winding roads. "You were incredible tonight," he murmured, breaking the silence. His voice was low, vibrating through the quiet space. "I had a good teacher," Mia replied softly, looking down at her hands. The diamond caught the passing streetlights, flashing brilliant sparks of fire. It was beautiful. It was perfect. And it was a lie. A pang of sadness hit her so hard it almost knocked the wind out of her. The night was over. The carriage was turning back into a pumpkin. Soon, she would have to give the ring back, take off the Cinderella dress, and go back to being his secretary. The thought made her throat tight. She waited for him to give the driver her address, the small, sensible apartment in the city. But he didn't. As they hit the highway, she realized they were heading in the wrong direction. They were moving toward the skyline, toward the exclusive district where the buildings touched the clouds. "Damien," she said, confused, knitting her brow. "You're going the wrong way. My apartment is—" "We aren't going to your apartment," he interrupted gently. He didn't look at her. He looked straight ahead, his jaw set. "After that performance? If Jason or any of his friends decide to check up on the happy couple, dropping you off at a separate address would ruin everything we built tonight. Social media is already buzzing. We have to maintain the appearance until the news cycle moves on." It was a flimsy excuse, flimsy as wet tissue paper. Jason wasn't going to follow them. The paparazzi weren't camped outside her walk-up. Mia knew it, and she suspected Damien knew it too. But she didn't argue. She didn't want to argue. The truth was, she didn't want the night to end either. The car pulled up to the private entrance of the Pinnacle, the most exclusive residential tower in the city. The elevator ride to the penthouse was swift and silent, the numbers climbing higher and higher, mirroring the rising tension in Mia's chest. When the doors opened, they stepped directly into a space that was breathtakingly vast and achingly lonely. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights, a glittering sea of diamonds that rivaled the one on her finger. The apartment was modern, sleek, and cold, much like the man who owned it, or so she had thought. Damien walked over to a side table, pouring 2 glasses of water. He handed one to her, his fingers brushing hers. The contact sent a fresh wave of heat through her veins. "Thank you," she whispered. She looked around, feeling suddenly shy in the intimate quiet of his home. I should probably give you this back." She reached for her left hand, her fingers hovering over the ring. She started to pull it off, the metal sliding reluctantly over her knuckle. "Don't," Damien said. His voice was sharp, startling her. She froze. He was watching her, his eyes dark and intense, stripping away the pretenses of the evening. He walked over to her, closing the distance until he was standing just inches away. He reached out and covered her hand with his own, stopping her from removing the ring. He pushed it back down, settling it firmly at the base of her finger where it belonged. "Keep it on," he said, his voice dropping to a husky murmur. "For tonight. The sizing might be tricky to adjust if you take it off now. And besides," he paused, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, a touch so tender it made her knees weak. "It fits you too well to take off yet." Mia stared up at him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The air between them was charged, electric with possibility. This wasn't about the ex anymore. This wasn't about a ruse. This was about the man standing in front of her, looking at her as if she were the only woman in the world. "You must be tired," he said, stepping back slightly, though his eyes lingered on her lips. "The guest room is down the hall on the right. It has an en-suite. You'll find everything you need." He started to turn away, then stopped. He unbuttoned his cuffs and shrugged off his white dress shirt, revealing a pristine white undershirt and the sculpted muscles of his arms. He held the dress shirt out to her. "Here," he said, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I doubt that silk dress is comfortable to sleep in. Wear this." Mia took the shirt. It was warm from his body. It smelled like him, cedar, spice, and power. She clutched it to her chest, nodding mutely. "Good night, Mia," he said softly. "Good night, Damien." As she watched him walk down the hall to his own room, clutching his shirt and wearing his ring. Mia knew one thing for certain: she was in deep, and she had no desire to swim back to the surface. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, not harsh or demanding like the office fluorescent lights, but soft and golden. Mia stirred, the heavy thread count sheets feeling like a cloud against her skin. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The scent of cedar and expensive detergent filled her nose, triggering a flood of memories from the night before. She sat up, clutching the oversized white dress shirt around her. She was in the master bedroom. She froze. Had they? No. The memories sharpened. Damien had insisted she take the bed. "You need the rest more than I do," he had said, dismissing her protests with a wave of his hand. He had slept in the guest room. The realization brought a flush of warmth to her cheeks. The ruthless CEO, the man who negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking, had slept on a smaller bed so his secretary could have the best view of the sunrise. Mia swung her legs out of bed, her bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. She walked out of the room, the shirt hanging to her mid-thigh, the sleeves rolled up past her wrists. The penthouse was quiet, filled with the smell of brewing coffee. She followed the scent to the kitchen. Damien was there, and the sight of him stopped her dead in her tracks. He was leaning against the marble island, holding a mug of coffee. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a simple black t-shirt that hugged his chest. His feet were bare. His hair, usually gelled into rigid perfection, was messy, falling over his forehead in soft waves. He wasn't the CEO. He wasn't the terrifying Mr. Blackwood. He was just a man. A dangerously attractive, sleepy, domestic man. He looked up as she entered, his eyes softening instantly. "Morning. I hope the bed was comfortable." "It was perfect," Mia stammered, feeling painfully exposed yet strangely comfortable. "You didn't have to do that, you know. Give me your room." "I wanted to," he said simply. He turned to the machine and poured a second cup, sliding it across the island toward her. "Black, 1 sugar. Correct?" Mia took the mug, her fingers brushing his. "You remember my coffee order?" "I remember everything about you, Mia," he replied, his voice low. He took a sip of his coffee, leaning back casually. "I know you hate the air conditioning in the conference room. I know you stay late every Tuesday to double-check the payroll so no one misses a check. I know you water the plants in the lobby because the cleaning crew forgets." Mia stared at him, stunned. I thought you never noticed me. I'm just part of the machinery." Damien let out a dry, humorless laugh. He looked out the window at the sprawling city below. "It's lonely at the top, Mia. The machinery is cold. You were the only warm thing in that building. I watched you work yourself into the ground for people who didn't appreciate you. I watched Jason treat you like an accessory, and I hated it." He turned his gaze back to her, raw and vulnerable. "I hated seeing you undervalued, because I knew exactly what you were worth." The confession hung in the air, heavy and sweet. It wasn't the adrenaline of the wedding or the performance of a husband. This was the truth. It was intimacy without the audience. Mia felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of finally being seen. "Damien," she whispered, stepping closer to the island. A sharp, incessant buzzing interrupted her. Damien frowned, glancing at his phone, which was vibrating violently on the counter. Then Mia's phone, which she had left on the charger near the fridge, began to ring. Then the landline on the wall chimed in. The peaceful bubble shattered. Damien picked up his phone, swiping the screen. His expression hardened instantly. The softness vanished, replaced by the sharp, analytical look of the CEO. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it around to show her. It was a news alert from a major business tabloid. The headline screamed in bold black letters, "Billionaire CEO Damien Blackwood secretly marries assistant." Below it was a photo from last night, a candid shot of them on the dance floor. Damien's forehead was resting against hers, his hand possessively on her waist, the massive diamond on her finger catching the light. It looked undeniably real. It looked like a love story for the ages. "It's viral," Damien said, his voice calm but tight. "Twitter, the business journals, even the gossip blogs, Everyone thinks we eloped. Mia's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God! The board. The shareholders. Jason. This is a disaster. I have to issue a statement. I have to tell them it was a misunderstanding, a joke. She reached for her phone, panic rising in her chest. She was going to ruin him. She was going to be the scandal that brought down his reputation. Damien's hand shot out, covering hers, stopping her from picking up the device. Damien, let go! I have to fix this, she cried, her voice trembling. Why? He asked. The single word stopped her. She looked up at him, confused. What do you mean, why? Because it's a lie. Because it's going to hurt your company. Because you don't want to be married to me? The question was quiet, vulnerable, and completely disarming. He wasn't looking at the phone. He wasn't thinking about the shareholders. He was looking at her. He reached over and pulled the landline cord out of the wall. He turned his own phone off and tossed it onto the sofa. He took her phone from under her hand and powered it down. Silence returned to the kitchen. Damien, Mia breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. This isn't a game anymore. The whole world thinks we're married. Damien walked around the island. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. Let them think it, he whispered, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. Would it be so terrible, Mia? If it were true? Mia's breath hitched. Would it? Being with him, being protected by him, being seen by him, it was everything she had ever wanted. But was he asking because he needed to save face or because he wanted her? The line between the lie and the truth had vanished completely, and Mia was terrified to step forward, yet unable to pull away. This was the breaking point. The world knew the lie, and Mia was ready to run to save his reputation. But the mistake she makes by leaving the ring behind? It almost cost her the only love she's ever truly known. The fragile peace of the morning didn't last. It couldn't. The world outside the penthouse was too loud, too demanding, and too hungry for scandal. While Damien had silenced the phones in the kitchen, he couldn't silence the reality that was pounding at the door. An hour later, the building's concierge buzzed up with an urgent package, a legal courier from the board of directors. Damien took it into his study, his face grim. Mia, left alone in the living room, felt the walls closing in. She turned on the television, a mistake she regretted instantly. The news was running a segment on the Cinderella wedding, but the tone wasn't a fairy tale, it was scrutiny. Then, the anchor switched to a live phone interview. Mia froze. It was Jason. Look, I know Mia. Jason's voice crackled through the speakers, sounding smug and vindictive. She's a secretary. She's desperate. This whole marriage thing? It's a shame. She probably begged him to do it to make me jealous. Blackwood is a smart guy. He wouldn't actually marry someone like her without a prenup or a press release. It's fake, and frankly it's pathetic. Mia muted the TV, her hands shaking so hard she dropped the remote. The shame was a physical blow, hot and suffocating. Someone like her. The words echoed in her skull. Jason was right. Not about the desperate part, but about the mismatch. She was dragging Damien down. The board was probably threatening to oust him. The stock prices would wobble. His reputation, built on cold, hard logic, was being tarnished by a melodramatic romance scandal. She looked toward the closed door of the study. She could hear Damien's voice, low and angry, arguing on a conference call. He was fighting for her. He was risking everything for a lie that had gotten out of hand. She couldn't let him do it. She loved him. She realized that now, with a terrifying clarity, and because she loved him, she had to leave him. She had to be the one to cut the cord before he was forced to choose between her and his life's work. Mia moved quickly, driven by a frantic, heartbreaking resolve. She changed back into her clothes from the day before, folding Damien's white shirt neatly and placing it on the bed. She found a notepad on the nightstand. Her hand trembled as she wrote, "Damien, thank you for saving me, but I can't let you drown for it. I'm going to release a statement saying I made it all up, that you were just being kind. I'll resign on Monday. You deserve someone who fits in your world, not someone you have to defend. I'm sorry, Mia. She stared at the ring on her finger, the diamond that had made her feel like a queen. It felt heavy now, like a stolen crown. With a sob catching in her throat, she pulled it off. She placed it on top of the note. It sat there, cold and sparkling, a symbol of a promise that couldn't be kept. She slipped out of the penthouse, avoiding the elevator to the lobby where paparazzi might be waiting, and took the service exit. 40 minutes later, Damien emerged from his study. He looked exhausted but determined. He had told the board to go to hell, effectively betting his career on his marriage. He walked into the living room, expecting to see Mia. Mia? I handled the silence. The penthouse was empty. A cold dread settled in his stomach, heavier than any business failure he had ever faced. He checked the kitchen, the terrace, then the bedroom. He saw the shirt first, folded with military precision. Then he saw the note, and the ring. Damien Blackwood didn't panic. He didn't cry. He exploded into motion. He grabbed the note, crushing it in his fist. He didn't even read the whole thing. The first line was enough. I can't let you drown. Stupid woman, he growled, grabbing his keys. You think you're the anchor? You're the damn lifeboat. He didn't call the driver. He took the sports car he kept for weekends, the engine roaring to life like a beast waking up. He knew where she would go. Not to her apartment. The press would be swarming there. She would go to the one place she felt invisible. He drove with a reckless disregard for speed limits, weaving through traffic, his mind singular and focused. She wasn't leaving him. Not today. Not ever. He found her sitting on a bench facing the water, her knees pulled up to her chest, looking small and defeated. The sight broke his heart and fueled his rage in equal measure. He slammed the car door and marched across the grass. Mia! She jumped, turning around. Her eyes widened when she saw him. Damien? What? You shouldn't be here. The cameras, I don't care about the cameras, he shouted, closing the distance between them. He wasn't the composed CEO now. He was a man unraveling. He stopped in front of her, breathing hard. You left. You took off the ring, and you left. I had to. Mia stood up, tears streaming down her face. Did you hear Jason? Did you hear the news? I'm ruining you, Damien. I'm a liability. I'm just a secretary, and you're you. I can't let you destroy your empire for a fake marriage. Is that what you think this is? Damien stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous, trembling growl. You think I stood up to Jason for a prank? You think I told the board to shove their opinions because I'm a bit? Yes, Mia cried. Because you're kind, and you wanted to help me, but it went too far. It didn't go far enough. Damien grabbed her shoulders, his grip tight, desperate. He shook her slightly, forcing her to look at him. I didn't play the husband last night, Mia, he said, his voice cracking with raw emotion. I wasn't acting. I was practicing. I was finally doing the one thing I've wanted to do for 3 years. Mia stared at him, her breath caught in her throat. What? I didn't buy that ring for a ruse, Damien said, his eyes burning into hers. I bought it because I knew the moment I put it on your finger, I was never going to want to take it off. I'm angry, Mia. Not because you lied, but because you tried to leave me. You tried to decide for me what I need. And what I need is you. The world seemed to stop spinning. The noise of the city faded. There was only Damien, looking at her with a terrifying, beautiful vulnerability. Do you love me? She whispered, barely daring to hope. Damien let out a ragged breath, resting his forehead against hers. I have loved you since the day you walked into my office and reorganized my entire life. I just didn't think I deserved you. But I'm done waiting. And I'm certainly done pretending. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring. Give me your hand. It wasn't a request. It was a plea. And this time, Mia knew the answer. The wind off the river was cold, cutting through the thin fabric of Mia's blouse, but she didn't feel it. All she could feel was the warmth of Damien's hand holding hers and the terrifying, wonderful weight of his confession. The park, usually a place of solitude where she ate her lunch in quiet isolation, had transformed into the stage for the most pivotal moment of her life. Damien didn't let go of her hand. He held it as if it were the only anchor keeping him tethered to the earth. He took a deep breath, the air misting in front of his face, and looked at her with a clarity that stripped away the last remnants of the CEO persona. "For 3 years, Mia," he started, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "I told myself that I was being professional. I told myself that you were my employee and that crossing that line would be an abuse of power. I told myself that I was keeping you safe by keeping my distance." He let out a short, bitter laugh, shaking his head. "But I was lying. I wasn't keeping you safe. I was keeping myself safe. I was terrified that if I showed you who I really was, a man who is selfish and demanding and obsessed with his work, you would look at me with fear instead of that patient kindness you'd give everyone else." He stepped closer, his thumb tracing the veins on the back of her hand. "When you showed me that invitation in the stairwell, when I saw how he had hurt you, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just anger at Jason. It was anger at myself. I realized I had wasted 3 years watching you from behind a desk while another man made you feel small. I realized that if I didn't step in, if I didn't claim my place in your life right then and there, I might lose you forever. The wedding was an excuse, Mia. It was the catalyst I needed to break my own rules." Mia listened, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. Do you really mean that? You aren't just saying this to fix the scandal?" "To hell with the scandal," Damien swore softly. "I can rebuild a reputation. I can build a new company from the ground up if I have to. But I cannot build a life without you. I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't want to play the part of your husband for the cameras and then go sleep in the guest room. I hate the guest room." A small, watery laugh escaped Mia's lips. "It is a very nice guest room, though." Damien smiled, a real, full smile that reached his eyes and transformed his face. He lifted her hand, holding the ring between his fingers. He didn't force it back on. He held it suspended there, shimmering in the pale afternoon light. "Mia," he said, his voice dropping to a solemn whisper, "I made a lot of demands over the last 24 hours. I told you what to wear. I told you how to act. I told you not to look down. I'm sorry for that. I don't want to command you anymore. I want to ask you." He slowly lowered himself to one knee on the grass. Mia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Passers-by in the park stopped to watch. A businessman in a suit kneeling before a woman in work clothes near the riverbank, but neither of them noticed. "Mia," Damien said, looking up at her with complete vulnerability. "I love you. I love your resilience. I love your brilliance. I love the way you make my cold, empty life feel like a home. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of marrying me? For real. No expiration date. No pretending. Just us." Mia looked down at him. She looked at the ring, then at the man. She thought about the stairwell, the tears, and the humiliation of the invitation. It felt like a lifetime ago. That pain had been the fire that burned away the old Mia, the one who settled for less. Standing here now, loved by a man who saw her as his equal, she knew she would never settle again. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes. Yes, Damien." His hands were shaking slightly as he slid the ring back onto her finger. It settled into place with a sense of finality, as if it had always belonged there. He stood up and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a fierce, consuming passion that made the world spin. It wasn't a performance for Jason. It wasn't a show for the board. It was a promise. 6 months later, the morning light in the executive suite was bright and unforgiving, but the atmosphere in the office had changed completely. It was no longer a sterile ice palace of silence and fear. There were fresh flowers on the reception desk, white lilies, Mia's favorite. The air hummed with a productive, vibrant energy. Mia sat on the edge of the massive mahogany desk, her heels dangling off the floor, reviewing a merger file. She wasn't wearing a pencil skirt and a blouse that blended into the beige walls. She was wearing a tailored crimson dress that commanded attention. She wasn't the secretary anymore. She was the chief operating officer, a title she had earned not by marriage, but by the sheer competence she had finally been allowed to unleash. Damien sat in his chair, but he wasn't looking at his screens. He was looking at her. He had swiveled his chair around, ignoring the blinking light of the telephone line. "You know," he said, a playful smirk tugging at his lips, "I'm technically supposed to be in a meeting with the legal team right now." "You are," Mia replied without looking up from the file, flipping a page. "But you pushed it back 15 minutes because you wanted to watch me tear apart these contract stipulations." "Guilty," Damien murmured, standing up and walking over to her. He stepped between her knees, placing his hands on the desk on either side of her hips, trapping her in the best possible way. "You're terrifying when you negotiate. It's incredibly attractive." Mia looked up, closing the file. She smiled, wrapping her arms around his neck. The diamond on her hand flashed, catching the sunlight. "I learned from the best." Life had settled into a rhythm that was better than any fairy tale because it was real. The scandal had blown over in weeks, replaced by the narrative of a power couple that the business world couldn't help but admire. As for Jason, the last Mia had heard, his company had been absorbed by a larger conglomerate for pennies on the dollar, and his wife had left him shortly after the foreclosure. He was a footnote in her history, a ghost that no longer haunted her. "Are we still on for dinner with your mother tonight?" Mia asked, smoothing the lapel of Damien's jacket. "Only if you promise to hold my hand so she doesn't criticize my tie," Damien teased. "I'll hold your hand," Mia promised, leaning in to kiss him softly. "I've got you." The door to the office opened, and a young assistant, nervous, new, and terrified, poked her head in. "Mr. Blackwood? Mrs. Blackwood? The investors are here." Mia hopped off the desk, smoothing her dress. She didn't look frightened. She didn't look small. She walked to the door, Damien right beside her, his hand resting comfortably at the small of her back. "Let's go," Mia said, her voice steady and confident. As they walked down the hall, passing the break room where the coffee machine hummed, Mia glanced toward the emergency stairwell door. A smile touched her lips. It was a strange, beautiful irony. The place where she had felt her life ending was the exact spot where it had truly begun. She remembered the girl sobbing on the concrete floor, clutching a cruel note. She wanted to go back and hug her. She wanted to whisper to her, "It's okay to cry. Let it all out. Because when you stand up, you're going to be taller than you ever imagined." Damien squeezed her hand, sensing her thoughts. "What are you thinking about?" Mia looked up at her husband, her partner, her protector. She laughed, a sound that was light, free, and full of joy. It echoed down the hallway, far louder than the silence she used to keep. "I was just thinking," she said, squeezing his hand back. "I'm really glad I opened that invitation." And as they walked into the boardroom together, side by side, newlywed and victorious, the heavy cream-colored envelope was nothing more than a distant memory, a piece of paper that had tried to bury her but instead had only served to plant the seed of the life she was always meant to live. The worst moment of her life had no end. It had been a doorway, and thank God she had walked through it. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe that sometimes love is hiding in the places we least expect it, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Like this video so more people can find hope in these stories. And subscribe if you want more narratives that remind you of your own worth. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of your heart.